What if a single message could have saved a life? One of the world's most celebrated athletes, and no one saw it in time. That was the chilling reality in the early hours of that fateful morning. A morning that began like any other for Anthony Joshua, but would end in chaos, confusion, and heartbreak. The sun had barely risen over Lagos, Nigeria, when a series of warnings flashed across his phone and tablet. Messages from his closest confidants, from security personnel, even from people who had only his safety in mind, all urging him to stay put. None of these warnings were read. None of them were acknowledged. And soon, the consequences would become painfully clear. Imagine sitting in a hotel room, the air still thick with the remnants of a night that promised nothing but routine. You stretch, check your messages, maybe glance at the news, and prepare for the day ahead. For most of us, it's mundane. But for Anthony Joshua, this morning held the weight of unpredictability, of fate teetering just beyond perception. Unbeknownst to him, the world outside was already whispering warnings. Unseen threats, unusual activity on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, a highway notorious for accidents, for careless drivers, for tragedy waiting around the next curve. And yet, in that quiet room, the superstar remained unaware. Or perhaps, he chose to ignore what was there, what was visible to anyone who would just look. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The messages on his devices were simple, short, urgent, almost desperate. Do not leave the hotel. Something feels off. Unusual activity on the highway. Wait. Stay safe. Don't risk it. They weren't from strangers. These were voices that mattered. People who had his well-being in their hands. And yet, when investigators later reviewed the scene, what they found was stark. Multiple unread messages, waiting quietly on his screen, never acknowledged, never acted upon. Each notification was a potential lifeline, a chance to avert disaster. Each one ignored. Each one a harbinger of what was about to unfold. By 11 a.m., Anthony Joshua had stepped into the SUV that would carry him down that highway. He was seated behind the driver, his security detail trailing closely behind in another vehicle. To anyone observing, it was a routine departure. Another day, another schedule, another stop in a life that has always seemed larger than most. But the road ahead had other plans. The SUV would smash into a stationary truck, an accident so violent it would leave 2 people dead and Joshua himself battered and dazed. The footage that emerged online captured him shirtless, sitting amid shards of glass, staring at the chaos that had just erupted. The world watched, frozen in disbelief. How could this happen to a man so vigilant, so disciplined, so seemingly untouchable? What happened next is a question that has haunted many. How could someone so prepared, so surrounded by caution, fall victim to what appeared to be sheer misfortune? The truth, however, is never as simple as it seems. Investigators were not just confronted with a crash site. They were confronted with a timeline of decisions, choices, and ignored warnings. They were confronted with a hotel room full of unanswered messages, each one a piece of a puzzle that spoke louder than the wreckage on the expressway ever could. It was here, in the quiet aftermath of the accident, that the first real questions emerged. How did Anthony Joshua end up in that SUV that morning? Why did he leave despite the warnings? And what exactly did investigators find in that hotel room that shocked them to their core? It wasn't just about the crash. It was about foresight, about risk, about the delicate interplay between fame, responsibility, and human error. Joshua, after all, is not just a boxer. He is a global figure, a symbol of strength, resilience, and discipline. Yet even the strongest among us are vulnerable. Even those who seem untouchable can find themselves in situations where every precaution, every step, every piece of advice, if ignored, can have devastating consequences. And that morning, those vulnerabilities were laid bare in a way that few could have predicted. The SUV, traveling beyond the legally prescribed speed limit, attempted an overtaking maneuver that went horribly wrong. It collided with a stationary truck parked on the side of the road. 5 men were involved in total. Joshua, seated behind the driver, survived with minor injuries, but the toll was far greater than just the physical. 2 people died. Lives ended in an instant. Families shattered. And all of it traced back, in part, to warnings that were never seen. Every detail, every factor, every split-second decision now mattered. Investigators were tasked not only with understanding the mechanics of the crash, but the human story behind it. What was Joshua thinking? What pressures weighed on him? What caused him to disregard what, to others, seemed like clear danger signals? And then there was the footage. Raw, unedited, and haunting. Joshua, shirtless, dazed, seated among wreckage, fragments of glass glinting like cold reminders of what had just transpired. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. And real, as always, hits harder than fiction. People around the world paused, rewound, watched again. This was Anthony Joshua, the undefeated, the champion, reduced to a man grappling with sudden vulnerability. It was shocking. It was humbling. And it begged a question no one could answer yet. Could this have been prevented? As the narrative unfolded, the focus inevitably returned to that hotel room. Investigators meticulously combed through every corner, every device, every unread message. There was no evidence of foul play in the room itself. No note, no forced entry, no apparent sign of coercion. What was found, however, was the most telling evidence of all: neglect, or perhaps misjudgment, in the face of clear, pressing warnings. Security messages went unanswered. Messages from colleagues and friends, urgent in tone, ignored. Notifications blinked silently on the tablet and phone, a haunting testament to what could have been done differently. Each unread message became a symbol, a small digital lifeline that, if acted upon, might have altered the course of that morning. So we ask again, how does someone of Joshua's stature, someone with a team around him whose job is to anticipate every risk, end up in that position? Was it overconfidence? Was it distraction? Or was it simply a tragic sequence of human errors compounded by fate? The answers, at least initially, were murky. But the more investigators delved, the more the pattern emerged. A warning here. A suggestion ignored there. A miscommunication. And suddenly, what seemed like an accident began to take on a dimension of inevitability. Not inevitability in a cosmic sense, but inevitability born of overlooked signals and missed opportunities. What makes this story particularly chilling is how ordinary the warning signs were. In a world where Joshua commands headlines for his strength and victories, the simple act of reading a message might have made all the difference. A few minutes, a brief hesitation, a call to delay departure, small acts, seemingly mundane, with massive potential consequences. And yet, in the whirlwind of fame, schedules, and routine, they went unnoticed. That is the human element, the part that resonates with audiences. Even champions are human. Even champions can overlook the simplest, most critical signs. As this narrative unfolds, the world watches not only for answers, but for understanding. How does fame intersect with responsibility? How do we reconcile extraordinary strength with ordinary human oversight? And what does it truly take to prevent tragedy when warning signs are ignored? These questions are not rhetorical. They are the heartbeat of this story. Each message, each device, each small indicator in that hotel room represents a crossroads, a moment where destiny and decision collided. And yet, the story does not end here. While the crash dominates headlines, the investigation into Joshua's hotel room opens an entirely different chapter, one of intrigue, human fallibility, and stark revelations. Investigators found more than just unread messages. They found evidence of patterns, hints of ignored advice, and subtle warnings that went unheeded. Each discovery raised more questions. What was Joshua's state of mind? Were there pressures we do not yet understand? Did the environment around him, the hotel, the security, the traffic warnings, contribute to a chain reaction that led to disaster? What if a single choice, a seemingly insignificant decision, could alter the course of your entire day, even your life? For Anthony Joshua, that morning began like any other. The sun had barely crested the horizon over Lagos, painting the city in muted golds and grays, while the city itself was already stirring with the familiar chaos of traffic horns, motorcycles, and the distant wail of sirens. Inside his hotel room, however, a different kind of tension lingered in the air. It was quiet, almost too quiet, a deceptive calm before the storm. Joshua stretched as he rose from bed, the remnants of sleep still clinging to his body. He checked the time, then the small tablet and phone resting on the nightstand. Notifications blinked silently. At first, he barely noticed them. The routine of messages, emails, reminders, it was the usual morning ritual for someone of his status. But these notifications were different. They weren't just casual greetings or mundane updates. They were urgent, almost desperate. Security personnel, trusted associates, and close friends had sent warnings. Do not leave yet. Wait for a safer moment. There is unusual activity near the highway. Every message carried a sense of immediacy, a concern that demanded attention. Yet, for reasons no one fully understands, these alerts went unread. Imagine that. Messages designed to protect, to prevent a calamity, lying in wait on a screen that could have been the difference between safety and disaster. They blinked silently in the soft morning light, a ghostly chorus of warnings no one acted upon. It's hard to overstate the significance of that moment. In the hands of a lesser-known individual, perhaps these messages would have been inconsequential. But this wasn't just any man. It was Anthony Joshua, a former heavyweight champion, a global icon, a person whose decisions rippled far beyond the confines of a hotel room. Joshua dressed quickly, slipping into casual travel clothes, his mind occupied with the schedule ahead. A routine trip, a short journey along a highway he had traversed many times. In his mind, it was ordinary, but fate does not abide by routine. Outside, the morning sun revealed a world in motion. Vehicles inching along crowded streets, the faint hum of engines, the occasional honk of impatient drivers. In that city alive with movement, a single SUV would soon become the center of an event that would shock the nation. Stepping into the hallway, Joshua may not have fully appreciated the weight of those unread messages. It's easy to forget the human element in moments of habitual action. A person can walk past warnings, ignore suggestions, and still feel invincible. Perhaps that was the case here. Perhaps the rhythm of fame, of a life lived under constant scrutiny, created a sense of untouchability. Or perhaps it was simply the nature of human oversight. To underestimate the importance of a small, seemingly inconsequential alert. His security team was already waiting outside. They had been briefed on potential risks, aware of unusual reports near the highway, and ready to intervene if necessary. But protocols can only go so far. Guards and assistants can suggest caution, advise delays, and monitor for threats, yet the ultimate decision rests with the individual. And that morning, Joshua made the choice to depart. He entered the SUV, his posture calm, his demeanor composed, as if nothing extraordinary was about to unfold. The doors closed, the engine roared, and the vehicle began its journey. But even in motion, the warning signs persisted. Messages continued to arrive on his phone and tablet. Traffic seems off. Proceed with caution. Wait until you receive confirmation. Each one was a digital lifeline, a thread that could have altered the trajectory of the morning. And yet, they were left unread, unacknowledged, almost as if the world outside had decided to speak in silence, leaving Joshua to navigate uncertainty blindfolded. Traveling behind the driver, the familiar rhythm of a SUV on the asphalt gave no hint of the disaster about to strike. Every curve, every turn, every lane change would become a critical factor in the moments to come. Joshua's mind may have wandered, thinking of appointments, schedules, and commitments. The world around him. The traffic, the other vehicles, the subtle shifts in movement became a blur. And as the SUV gained speed, inching closer to a fate neither planned nor predicted, the scene was set for a collision that would leave two dead and many more shaken to their core. The human element in all of this cannot be ignored. Even champions, even icons, are fallible. A single ignored warning, a single unread message, and the consequences are stark. Investigators later pointed to the hotel room as the critical starting point, the place where decisions were made or not made. Every notification, every plea for caution represented a fork in the road. And in that quiet room, the choice was made, to proceed, to leave, and to face the highway that would test every ounce of reflex, judgment, and luck. As the SUV moved along the expressway, observers in other vehicles might have seen nothing unusual. To them, it was just another car in traffic, another person going about their day. But for Joshua, The world had shifted into a precarious balance. Unread messages, urgent warnings, and subtle signs of danger converged in a moment of tension that would erupt in catastrophe. It is both ironic and tragic. A morning of routine, meant to be uneventful, became the stage for a drama that no one could have scripted. This is where the story becomes more than an accident. It becomes a study of human choice under pressure, of awareness and oversight, of how even the most disciplined individuals can fall prey to the unseen currents of fate. Investigators later pieced together the timeline with painstaking detail. Every message, every alert, every suggestion that was ignored became part of a narrative that was as revealing as it was heartbreaking. And for Joshua, the road ahead would test not only his physical resilience, but the consequences of decisions made in those critical morning hours. As the SUV approached the stretch of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway known for its unpredictability, the tension mounted. Each mile carried the weight of unread warnings. Each second represented a chance that had been missed. And then, in a flash that no one could predict, the vehicle lost control. The overtaking maneuver, the speed beyond the legal limit, the split-second misjudgment, all collided in a moment of chaos. Shattered glass, twisted metal, screams, and confusion. The morning's calm shattered into irrevocable tragedy. And yet, while the crash itself dominates the headlines, it is the hotel room, the unread messages, and the choice to ignore them that form the true heart of the story. Investigators found not just a scene of digital negligence, but a narrative of human vulnerability, decision-making under pressure, and the consequences of oversight. Every unread message was a thread in the tapestry of fate, and that morning, the threads were ignored. But even as we reflect on the chaos, the injuries, and the lives lost, the story refuses to end here. Because the investigation into Joshua's hotel room revealed something more. Something that would make even seasoned investigators pause. Evidence that was subtle, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to reshape the narrative. Warnings ignored, alerts unseen, and a chain of events that would lead to one of the most shocking revelations in Joshua's life. And just as the morning seemed to conclude with disaster, the questions emerged. What exactly did investigators find in that room? Why were the messages ignored? Could this have been prevented? And perhaps most hauntingly, what comes next when the weight of fate collides with human choice in such a devastating way? What if the thing that could have saved Anthony Joshua that morning wasn't a safety barrier, a trained reflex, or even sheer luck, but a message on a screen? Simple words typed in urgency, begging him to wait, to pause, to reconsider. Yet, like ghosts, they remained unseen, unread, their warnings lost to silence. Investigators later described the scene in his hotel room as haunting, tablets glowing faintly, phones vibrating with alerts, notifications stacking silently, a digital chorus pleading for attention. And Joshua? Oblivious, focused on routine, stepping into a vehicle that would carry him toward a collision that no amount of training or discipline could prevent. The messages weren't cryptic or obscure. They were plain, clear, and insistent. Do not leave yet. Highway activity seems unusual. Wait. Check your route before moving. Each sender knew Joshua personally, knew his schedule, and understood the stakes. They were trusted voices, his security personnel, longtime assistants, even close friends who had no authority over him, only concern. And yet, in that quiet morning, their pleas went unanswered. It's difficult to describe the weight of those unread messages without recognizing the human tendencies they expose. How often do we ignore alerts? Push aside warnings? Assume that a routine day will stay routine? Even the most disciplined, even the most world-class athletes, are not immune to the blind spot of habit. We underestimate risk when it doesn't immediately present itself. We rely on our experience, our intuition, our confidence, until, in one irreversible moment, it proves inadequate. Investigators later pieced together the timeline of messages. One from a security officer read, "Anthony, please delay departure. Something doesn't feel right near Mago. Traffic reports are inconsistent." Another from a close colleague, "Unusual congestion and vehicle movement reported along your route. Suggest waiting at the hotel until cleared." A third, from a friend who knew Joshua's routines intimately, warned simply, Be safe. Don't leave now. Every message was brief, yet urgent. Every message was ignored. Why? That remains one of the central mysteries. Was it overconfidence, a hallmark of elite athletes? Joshua had faced danger in the ring countless times, dodged punches that could end careers, and yet, outside the arena, he was still human, subject to error. Was it distraction, the mental load of appointments, press obligations, or personal matters? Or was it a simple lapse, a tiny decision that, in hindsight, held monumental consequences? The irony is unavoidable. Messages intended to protect, to preserve life, became evidence of vulnerability. Investigators described the hotel room as a time capsule, frozen at the moment before tragedy. Phones and tablets lay across surfaces like silent witnesses. Notifications blinked faintly, each one a small scream in a digital void. And in that quiet, routine setting, a chain of events began to unfold that would prove catastrophic. Security personnel later described their frustration. Their warnings, sent in real time, were met with silence. Protocols exist to mitigate risk, but they depend on communication and action. When the warnings go unseen, the system collapses, and even the best preparations are insufficient. The morning, otherwise mundane, transformed into a precarious dance of uncertainty. And it all traced back to a choice: to leave the hotel despite urgent advice. The nature of the messages themselves adds to the story's shock. These were not automated alerts or vague cautions. They were human voices, tailored to Joshua's circumstances. Each message referenced specific risks, observed anomalies, or reports from reliable sources. Some highlighted unusual vehicle movement near his route. Others described congestion and irregularities that suggested something was off. The language was insistent, bordering on urgent. And yet, for reasons investigators could only speculate about, they went unheeded. Consider the psychological weight of this scenario. Joshua, at that moment, had to balance personal agency, trust in his team, and his own confidence. It's not difficult to imagine a man accustomed to control, accustomed to mastery, assuming that nothing extraordinary could occur. Or perhaps he trusted his instincts, believed his experience, and thought the messages exaggerated the risk. But in human decision-making, even a momentary lapse or misjudgment can become irreversible. In this case, the stakes were lethal. What makes this chapter of the story so compelling is the tension between intent and outcome. The messages were sent with care and urgency. Their intent was protective. The outcome was tragic. That juxtaposition between what could have been and what actually occurred defines the narrative. Investigators later described reviewing the messages as a chilling moment. Each unread alert was a potential lifeline, and the fact that they were ignored transformed the morning from routine to disastrous. Even more striking is the sense of inevitability these unread messages create in hindsight. When the crash occurred on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, it wasn't merely an accident. It was the culmination of missed warnings, unacknowledged alerts, and a sequence of decisions that, if altered, might have prevented catastrophe. The highway, often described as unpredictable, became a stage where these consequences played out. And as the SUV collided with the stationary truck, the human cost was immediate and profound. 2 dead, multiple injured, and Anthony Joshua himself disoriented, shirtless, sitting amid shattered glass. And yet, while the crash dominates headlines, the true story lies in those moments before departure, in the hotel room, in the messages that blinked unseen, in the choices made and ignored. Each message represents not only a missed warning, but a broader reflection on human behavior. We often ignore what we do not immediately perceive as dangerous. We rely on experience over evidence. And when we do, even the most extraordinary among us are vulnerable. For viewers, this raises a direct question. How many times have we ignored warnings in our own lives, thinking danger was remote or improbable? And what happens when those warnings carry consequences far beyond our imagination? The story of Anthony Joshua that morning is a powerful reminder that human oversight, no matter how subtle, can have catastrophic effects. And yet, investigators discovered something even more shocking amidst these messages. Beyond the missed alerts, there were layers of information hinting at a broader context, reports of unusual patterns, intelligence on road activity, and details that suggested Joshua was stepping into a situation that was already volatile. The warnings were not merely cautious, they were prescient. The evidence implied that someone, somewhere, had anticipated risk. That foresight existed, yet it was invisible to Joshua at the critical moment. By now, the narrative is not just about a crash. It's about trust, decision-making, and human fallibility. It's about the tension between routine and unpredictability, between action and inaction. Each unread message becomes symbolic. A reminder that even the smallest oversight can carry monumental consequences. And as the morning progressed toward the collision, the scene was set for tragedy. But the story does not stop with the warnings themselves. What investigators found next went beyond missed communications. It revealed patterns, subtleties, and layers of information that suggested the morning could have been entirely different. It raised questions about preparation, vigilance, and the choices that define us when danger looms. And just as we begin to unravel the implications of these unread messages, another element of the story emerges, one that casts new light on the crash, the highway, and Joshua's decisions. Something in the hotel room suggested a timeline, a sequence of events, and a convergence of circumstances that no one anticipated. Messages weren't the only thing overlooked. There were signals, indicators, and signs that, if noticed, might have altered the trajectory of that morning entirely. And just as the SUV was about to make its fateful journey, the question remains, what exactly did those warnings contain? Why were they ignored? And could their heed have prevented disaster? Have you ever driven down a road and felt something was off? A subtle tension in the air, the way other drivers move, the way the pavement feels under your tires? That morning, Anthony Joshua would face exactly that sense, but magnified 1,000-fold. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, stretching like a steel ribbon through Nigeria's heartland, is notorious, not just for its traffic or its speed limits, but for the unpredictability that can turn routine travel into catastrophe. And that morning, the highway was poised to test every ounce of experience, discipline, and instinct Joshua possessed. From above, the highway might have seemed ordinary. Vehicles streamed along, motorcycles weaved through lanes, trucks rumbled along at varying speeds. But the details, often invisible at first glance, created a perfect storm. Investigators later noted reports of unusual activity. Vehicles moving erratically, sudden stops, congestion in areas where it wasn't normally expected. It was as if the expressway itself was signaling danger, sending small, almost imperceptible warnings to anyone paying attention. Yet, Joshua and his team drove into this environment largely unaware. Picture the SUV, Anthony seated behind the driver, gliding into the traffic flow. The morning sun reflected off the asphalt, creating glare that made visibility tricky. Around them, cars shifted lanes unpredictably. Security personnel followed behind, attempting to maintain awareness, but even the best preparation has limits. This wasn't a controlled environment. It was a highway, a place of variables, human error, and chaos ready to erupt. Speed would prove to be a critical factor. Investigators later reported that the SUV was traveling beyond the legally prescribed limit, a detail that, while common in everyday traffic, compounded risk in a high-stakes situation. But speed alone did not cause the crash. The vehicle attempted an overtaking maneuver, an action that required precise judgment, timing, and awareness of surrounding traffic. One miscalculation, one lapse in attention, and disaster becomes inevitable. What makes highways like this so dangerous is their deceptive familiarity. Drivers often believe they know the road, the conditions, the rhythm of traffic. But roads change from moment to moment. A truck parked too close to the shoulder, a motorbike swerving unexpectedly, a car braking sharply for no obvious reason. Each variable multiplies the complexity of navigation. And for Joshua, stepping into this environment while carrying the weight of unread warnings, the expressway became a gauntlet. The collision itself was violent and instantaneous. As the SUV moved to overtake a slower vehicle, it lost control, striking a stationary truck parked on the side. The impact twisted metal, shattered glass into fragments that glinted like shards of a nightmare. Passengers screamed. Nearby drivers swerved to avoid the carnage. The chaos was immediate, and in its wake lay devastation. 2 people dead, multiple injured, and Joshua himself dazed, shirtless, surrounded by the remnants of what had moments ago been an ordinary morning. It's impossible to overstate the emotional gravity of this scene. A highway, a machine of asphalt and vehicles, had transformed into a stage of life and death. And yet, while the crash dominates headlines, the underlying story is more subtle. It is the tension between foresight and ignorance, between preparation and human error, between warnings unheeded and consequences unavoidable. Every mile traveled carried risk, but that risk became catastrophic when combined with the sequence of decisions and oversights that began hours earlier in the hotel room. Investigators focused on the mechanics of the collision. They analyzed speed, braking, trajectory, and the sequence of maneuvers leading to the impact. But beyond the physical facts lay the human story. Joshua, experienced, disciplined, and highly trained, found himself vulnerable to circumstances outside his control. Even champions are not immune to the law of physics, the unpredictability of others, or the consequences of ignored warnings. Consider the perspective of those who witnessed the crash. Motorists caught in the chaos later described scenes of confusion and panic. Some attempted to render aid, while others froze in shock. The combination of sound, movement, and destruction created a surreal tableau, a moment that would be replayed countless times in news footage and online videos. Joshua, seated amid shattered glass, appeared both physically unharmed and profoundly human, a stark reminder that even the seemingly invincible are fragile. The human element on the highway cannot be ignored. Vehicles are operated by fallible people. Roads are filled with unpredictability. Even with a security convoy and trained drivers, Joshua faced variables that could not be entirely mitigated. And while the SUV's speed and maneuvering were contributing factors, investigators noted that external conditions, irregular traffic, vehicles parked improperly, and unusual activity reports also played a significant role. It was a collision of preparation and unpredictability, human choice, and environmental chaos. Yet the fatal highway is more than just a location. It is a character in the story. It represents the risk that comes from leaving safety behind, the consequences of moving forward despite warnings. Each meter of asphalt, each curve, each lane represents a decision point, and the consequences of those decisions can be irreversible. For Anthony Joshua, that highway became the ultimate test of judgment, reflex, and fortune. And then there is the question of timing. The SUV's movement along the expressway intersected with the convergence of risk factors in a way that was almost mathematical. Unusual activity on the road, vehicles parked irregularly, speed exceeding legal limits. These variables combined in a fraction of a second. 1 second earlier, 1 second later, the outcome could have been different. It is a reminder that in moments of crisis, timing is everything, and even small lapses can have catastrophic consequences. The aftermath on the highway was immediate and chaotic. Passengers scrambled to safety, nearby motorists tried to assist, and the noise of engines, horns, and cries filled the air. Emergency responders were called, but the damage had already been done. 2 lives lost, multiple injuries, and Anthony Joshua, despite minor physical injuries, faced the psychological weight of what had just occurred. The road that had seemed mundane hours earlier now loomed large in memory. A place of unpredictability and consequence, a corridor where human choices and chance collided with devastating effect. What makes this chapter of the story particularly compelling is not just the crash itself, but the context leading up to it. Every decision, from unread messages in the hotel room to the choice to proceed along the highway, contributed to this moment. The fatal highway is both literal and metaphorical. A representation of risk, oversight, and the collision of human decision-making with external factors beyond control. And just as investigators began piecing together the sequence of events, they uncovered additional insights about the highway itself. Reports of unusual traffic patterns, previous accidents, and irregular vehicle behavior painted a picture of a road fraught with hidden danger. Warnings had existed in multiple forms. Messages, traffic updates, even instinctual cues from the environment. But Joshua's path intersected with these hazards at a point where preparation met unpredictability, and the result was catastrophic. By now, the audience can see the layers of tension. This was no ordinary highway, no routine journey. It was a crucible, testing not just Joshua's physical capabilities, but the consequences of choices made hours earlier. The fatal highway, in all its chaos and unpredictability, became both witness and participant in the story. And as the SUV collided with the truck, it became impossible to separate human action from environmental fate. And yet, even amidst this devastation, the investigation reveals something more subtle. Beyond the mechanics of the crash, investigators found clues suggesting that the sequence of events could have been mitigated. The unusual activity reports, the warnings, the timing of the departure, all hinted at opportunities to avoid the collision. And as the highway settled into silence after the chaos, one question remained. What could have been done differently to prevent the tragedy that unfolded in mere seconds? It happened in a blink, yet the consequences would echo for years. One moment, the SUV was gliding along the Lagos-Ibadan expressway. The next, chaos erupted. The overtaking maneuver, the speed beyond the legal limit, the unpredictability of surrounding traffic, all converged into a violent moment of impact. The SUV struck a stationary truck parked along the roadside, metal twisting, glass shattering into fragments that glittered like cruel diamonds in the morning sun. The crash was not just physical. It was emotional, psychological, a collision of circumstance, decision, and human error. Inside the SUV, Anthony Joshua sat behind the driver. Minutes before, he had been immersed in routine, perhaps thinking about meetings, schedules, or obligations. But in that instant, there was only chaos. The force of impact threw passengers forward, shaking the vehicle violently. Cries pierced the air, some instinctive, some in shock. Windows shattered, scattering glass across seats and pavement. The deafening roar of twisted metal was accompanied by a quieter, yet more haunting sound, the sudden, fragile recognition of mortality. Eyewitness accounts later described a scene of utter confusion. Motorists swerved to avoid the wreckage, some braking abruptly, others freezing in disbelief. The collision created a ripple effect. Cars halted, motorcycles weaved frantically to avoid secondary impacts, and the normally bustling highway slowed to a chaotic standstill. People who had minutes before been absorbed in the mundane rhythms of daily travel were now witnesses to a moment none could forget. Joshua's security detail, following in a separate vehicle, immediately responded. They moved quickly to assess the situation, to ensure he was safe, to offer aid to others involved. But even with their training, the scene was overwhelming. 5 men in total were caught in the collision. 2 would not survive, their lives extinguished in an instant. Others were injured, some severely. Joshua himself emerged with minor injuries, a testament to both chance and the protection afforded by his vehicle and safety protocols. Yet the psychological impact, the shock, the guilt, the understanding of how close he had come to death, would linger far longer than any physical wound. Investigators later focused on the specifics of the collision. The SUV, attempting to overtake, misjudged the distance to the parked truck. Speed amplified the force of impact, while the vehicle's trajectory, influenced by subtle road conditions and tire grip, ensured that the collision was unavoidable once initiated. The technical breakdown was chilling. Every variable, from tire pressure to asphalt texture, contributed to the severity of the crash. It was not one single mistake, but a chain reaction, a sequence of small factors aligning to create disaster. Yet the human element remained central. Joshua, a man trained to anticipate and react, found himself at the mercy of variables outside his control. Even the most seasoned driver cannot account for every irregularity on a busy highway. And this is where the tragedy becomes layered. It is a collision of environment and human choice. The unread messages, the ignored warnings, the decision to depart. These factors converged with the mechanics of the highway to produce the catastrophic result. For Joshua, the immediate moments after impact were surreal. He was shirtless, surrounded by shattered glass, dazed but conscious. The physical trauma was minimal, but his expression captured something far deeper. Disbelief, vulnerability, the sudden awareness that life can pivot in an instant. Video footage, later circulating online, captured him sitting in the wrecked SUV, a world champion reduced to a man grappling with the fragility of existence. The image resonated globally, highlighting a truth that no championship, no title, no fame can shield a person from danger. Emergency services arrived swiftly, but the human and mechanical elements of the crash had already done their work. Paramedics assessed injuries, coordinated evacuation, and ensured the injured received immediate attention. Joshua was taken to a nearby hospital, treated for minor injuries, and monitored closely. Yet, amid the medical response, investigators began piecing together the broader story. What led to this moment, and why were the warnings sent hours earlier ignored? The collision's impact extended beyond the physical realm. It rippled through public consciousness, sparking outrage, sympathy, and widespread speculation. Social media erupted with video clips, eyewitness accounts, and commentary. Fans and critics alike grappled with disbelief. How could a man so disciplined, so experienced, and so surrounded by caution fall victim to such a sequence of events? It became apparent that the story of the collision was not just about mechanics, but about choices, psychology, and human fallibility. As investigators examined the crash site, details emerged that were both technical and revealing. The SUV's angle, the positioning of the truck, and the distribution of impact forces provided clues about the sequence of events. Security footage, when available, offered additional context. The speed of approach, lane positioning, and timing of maneuvers all contributed to reconstructing the precise moments before collision. Each piece of evidence helped form a picture that was both tragic and instructive. The emotional weight of the collision cannot be overstated. Lives were lost, routines shattered, and the illusion of invincibility broken. Joshua, despite minor injuries, faced the psychological consequences. Questions about decision-making, awareness of missed warnings, and the realization of how close he had come to death. For investigators, the crash was more than a physical event. And yet, the story does not end with the collision. While the impact itself captured global attention, what investigators uncovered next, inside Joshua's hotel room, on his devices, in the unread messages, would reveal a deeper, more unsettling layer. The collision was not merely an accident. It was the culmination of warnings ignored, signals missed, and a chain of events that began long before the SUV even left the hotel driveway. The collision was a turning point, but it was also a doorway. A doorway into questions that demanded answers. Why were the messages ignored? What role did his security detail play? How much did chance dictate the outcome? And perhaps most unsettling of all, could the tragedy have been avoided entirely if Joshua had seen and acted upon what was right in front of him? The crash was over, but the consequences were just beginning. For Anthony Joshua, the physical injuries were minor, a scratch here, a bruise there, the lingering ache of impact. But the emotional and psychological toll was far heavier. Sitting shirtless amid the wreckage, surrounded by shards of glass, dazed yet conscious, he had survived. Others had not. 2 lives were lost on that stretch of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, and several more were injured. In the span of seconds, a routine morning had transformed into tragedy, leaving survivors and witnesses alike grappling with shock, guilt, and disbelief. News of the collision spread rapidly. Social media erupted with videos of the wrecked SUV, images of Joshua being assisted by security personnel, and eyewitness accounts that varied wildly in detail and perspective. The world watched as the former heavyweight champion, a man celebrated for his strength, discipline, and unyielding presence in the ring, was suddenly vulnerable, human, exposed. Comments poured in from fans, fellow athletes, and global observers. Some expressed concern for his safety, others speculated on the cause, and many grappled with the stark reality that even the seemingly invincible are not immune to tragedy. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, attending to the injured, controlling traffic, and coordinating evacuation. Joshua was transported to a nearby hospital for assessment. Though his physical injuries were minor, the scene left lingering questions. Why had this happened, and could it have been prevented? Investigators immediately began piecing together the sequence of events, interviewing witnesses, examining the vehicles, and reviewing available footage. What emerged was not merely a story of a vehicle collision, but a complex narrative of human decision-making, environmental risk, and missed warnings. The SUV's trajectory and the mechanics of the crash provided crucial insights. Investigators noted that the vehicle had been traveling beyond the legally prescribed speed limit, attempting an overtaking maneuver when it lost control. The stationary truck, parked at the roadside, became an immovable obstacle, a stark reminder of how quickly circumstances can become fatal when combined with speed, timing, and road conditions. Every technical detail mattered. Tire grip, lane width, reaction times, and visibility all converged in a moment of chaos that few could have predicted. But while the technical analysis explained what happened on the road, it did not fully address the human element. Joshua's hotel room, his devices, and the unread messages sent hours before departure formed a parallel narrative, one that investigators described as chilling. Each notification, a plea for caution, remained unseen. Every unread message represented a chance to prevent disaster, a thread that, if pulled, could have altered the morning's outcome. Security warnings, updates on unusual traffic activity, and alerts from colleagues were all ignored, intentionally or unintentionally, setting the stage for what would unfold on the expressway. Eyewitness accounts of the crash itself added a layer of emotional gravity. Motorists described the suddenness of the collision, the roar of metal on metal, and the chaos that ensued. Some attempted to assist the injured, while others froze in shock, unable to comprehend the scale of the event. Security personnel who had been following Joshua's SUV intervened, providing immediate aid and ensuring he was safe. Their accounts revealed a combination of training, quick thinking, and human limitation. Even the best-prepared teams cannot fully mitigate the unpredictability of a high-speed accident compounded by human error. Public reaction intensified as images and videos circulated online. The stark contrast between Joshua's public persona, a world champion, a symbol of discipline and invincibility, and his sudden vulnerability struck viewers worldwide. Social media became a space of speculation, sympathy, and analysis. Many questioned how someone so experienced could be involved in such a severe crash. Others speculated about road conditions, vehicle performance, or the actions of surrounding drivers. Yet, amid the speculation, a deeper story was emerging, a story of missed warnings, human judgment, and the fragile line between safety and catastrophe. Investigators also examined the sequence of responses immediately following the crash. Emergency protocols were activated, ambulances arrived promptly, and road safety officials began securing the area. However, the human and logistical complexity of the scene meant that chaos persisted in the immediate aftermath. Witnesses described the confusion as both overwhelming and surreal, a testament to how quickly normalcy can be replaced by crisis. Joshua himself faced an emotional aftermath that extended beyond physical pain. Surviving a crash that claimed lives nearby imposes a psychological weight few can fully articulate. Survivors' guilt, self-reflection, and the realization of how narrowly death was avoided contribute to a profound internal reckoning. Reports later indicated that Joshua was shaken, introspective, and deeply affected by the loss of life that had occurred around him. This dimension of aftermath, the internal human response, is as critical to the story as the physical mechanics of the accident. Meanwhile, investigators began connecting the dots between the crash and the earlier warnings. They reviewed security footage, phone records, and device activity. The pattern was undeniable: unread messages, ignored alerts, and a lack of response to information that could have altered Joshua's departure timeline. These details suggested that the accident was not solely a matter of mechanical failure or road conditions, but also of human oversight. A lapse that, in hindsight, proved catastrophic. This intersection of physical and human factors defines the aftermath. While the collision itself created immediate consequences, the broader narrative, decisions, warnings, timing, and human behavior, painted a more comprehensive picture of why the tragedy occurred. Each element, from unread messages to road hazards, combined to create a moment that no single factor could explain alone. Public discourse surrounding the crash also shifted as more information emerged. Media outlets emphasized the details of the collision, the injuries sustained, and the fatalities. Social media users debated responsibility, safety protocols, and the role of security personnel. Analysts and experts examined Joshua's decisions in light of the warnings, speculating on whether better communication or greater caution could have prevented the outcome. Each new detail added layers to the story, deepening the audience's understanding of the complex factors involved. And yet, even as the immediate aftermath unfolded, emergency response, public attention, media coverage, and the beginning of official investigations, the most revealing discoveries were yet to come. Investigators, examining Joshua's hotel room, uncovered the unread messages that had served as warnings in the hours leading up to the crash. These messages revealed not just the potential for prevention, but the intricate web of human communication, oversight, and the fragile margins within which decisions are made. It is in this intersection, between the physical aftermath of the crash and the unseen warnings that preceded it, that the story gains depth and complexity. The SUV, the highway, the collision, all are tangible and visible. But the digital footprints, the messages left unread, the advice ignored, are equally critical. Together, they form a narrative that is both a cautionary tale and a deeply human story of decision-making under pressure. As the world watched, the investigation continued. Emergency personnel, security teams, and analysts meticulously documented every detail. Survivors were questioned. Witnesses recounted events in real time. And in the midst of this intense scrutiny, one question lingered above all others. Could the tragedy have been avoided if the warnings had been heeded? The crash had already made headlines worldwide, but investigators knew that to truly understand what happened, they needed to return to the origin point, the hotel room. It was here, hours before the collision, that the story of warnings ignored and lives nearly altered began to unfold. The room itself was unremarkable, a standard luxury hotel suite, neat, well-kept, seemingly ordinary. But it held evidence that would shock everyone who examined it. Devices blinking with unread messages, notifications stacking quietly on screens, and the silent testimony of a man who, intentionally or not, had stepped into danger despite clear alerts. Investigators described entering the room as eerie. Phones lay on bedside tables, tablets rested on desks, notifications lit up screens like faint echoes of the events yet to come. It was as if the room itself held a pulse, a quiet reminder that the morning had already been set into motion before Joshua even left the suite. Every message left unread was a fragment of foresight, a chance to pause, to reconsider, to prevent disaster. And every message that went unseen now became a piece of the puzzle investigators had to solve. The first thing they noticed was the sheer volume of alerts. Security personnel, colleagues, and close friends had sent repeated messages, each one urgent, some desperate. Do not leave. Wait. Highway conditions unusual. Stay put. Something doesn't feel right. Check before moving. The tone varied slightly with each sender, but the underlying message was consistent: caution, vigilance, and delay. Yet the notifications blinked silently, a haunting testament to human oversight. Each ignored alert was a thread in a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. The devices themselves told a story. Investigators analyzed timestamps, delivery confirmations, and message content. The earliest messages arrived well before the SUV departed. Multiple follow-ups were sent, some escalating in urgency. Joshua, despite being experienced, disciplined, and aware of risk, had not opened a single one. The digital evidence created a timeline that was impossible to ignore. The warnings were sent, received, and ignored in real time, setting the stage for the collision on the highway. But the room revealed more than just unread messages. It revealed patterns of decision-making, human behavior, and subtle indicators that hinted at Joshua's state of mind that morning. There were items laid out neatly: clothing, travel essentials, personal effects, suggesting routine and preparation. Yet, amidst the organization, the silent digital warnings created tension. It was a room of contrasts: calm, prepared, and orderly, yet simultaneously a place of unseen danger. Security teams later described the room as a snapshot of the moments leading to the crash. Each device, Each notification and each unread alert provided context that was critical to understanding why Joshua chose to leave. Was it distraction, a focus on routine, overconfidence, or simply human error? Investigators could not definitively answer, but the evidence suggested that the warnings, though visible in a technical sense, were effectively invisible in practice. They existed, but they did not penetrate the decision-making process. There was a haunting quality to the scene. Devices hummed silently, screens flickered, and the faint blue glow of unread notifications created an almost spectral presence. Each message represented a lifeline, a chance to prevent tragedy. The investigators noted the irony. In a room designed for comfort, safety, and preparation, the very tools that could have averted disaster were ignored. It became a stark reminder of human vulnerability, no matter how disciplined or prepared one might be. Among the messages, some stood out for their specificity. One from a security officer detailed unusual vehicle patterns on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, noting that several trucks had parked irregularly and that traffic flow was inconsistent. Another message, from a close confidant, warned that reports suggested a higher risk of accidents that morning, recommending that Joshua delay his departure. Each message carried actionable information. Each was ignored. The digital record painted a portrait of a preventable risk, one that, had it been acknowledged, might have changed the course of events entirely. Investigators also examined timing. The sequence of message delivery, receipt, and lack of response created a timeline that was as chilling as it was revealing. Messages arrived in clusters, some minutes apart, some seconds apart. Each was a pulse of urgency, escalating the warning. And yet, the SUV departed before any were read, effectively removing any chance for intervention. It was as if the room itself had been sending silent SOS signals, but they were never answered. This discovery led investigators to consider human behavior in moments of routine versus crisis. Joshua, like many high-profile athletes, operates under pressure, schedules, and expectations. He is trained to manage risk in the ring, to anticipate movement, and to respond instantly under extreme stress. Yet in the hotel room, facing only notifications on a screen, the response was paradoxically absent. The very skills that make someone exceptional in one domain can sometimes fail to transfer to another, more subtle domain. In this case, reading and responding to warnings before departure. The hotel room also contained signs of preparation and planning, which added complexity to the narrative. Documents, itineraries, and personal items were neatly arranged, suggesting intention and discipline. But these outward signs of order contrasted sharply with the unseen chaos represented by the unread messages. It was a room caught between two realities, outward calm and the hidden potential for disaster. Investigators remarked that it was a visual representation of tension, organization meeting risk, preparation meeting oversight. Perhaps most unsettling was the realization that these unread messages were not random or minor. They were urgent, repeated, and sent by individuals whose judgment Joshua trusted. They represented professional and personal concern. The failure to engage with them raises questions that go beyond accident mechanics. What was Joshua thinking that morning? Did he perceive the messages and dismiss them, or did he fail to notice them entirely? These unanswered questions added layers of intrigue, complexity, and emotional weight to the investigation. The room, in essence, became the second crime scene, not a site of physical violence, but a space where human oversight set the stage for catastrophe. Devices, alerts, and notifications were the evidence. Timing, sequence, and content were the clues. And the story they told was undeniable. Warnings existed, were clear, and were ignored. The hotel room transformed from a neutral, mundane space into a repository of near-missed fate. As investigators documented the scene, they realized that understanding Joshua's actions required more than examining the crash site. It required a deep dive into his environment before the event, the very room where he prepared to step into danger. Each message, timestamp, and alert told a story of opportunity and missed opportunity. The room itself became a lens through which the collision, the highway, and the human decisions leading to it could be understood. And as the team continued to sift through devices, messages, and digital traces, one thing became increasingly clear. The story did not end with the crash. The hotel room contained secrets, warnings, and insights that, once revealed, would shock the public and force a reconsideration of the narrative surrounding that morning. Imagine this: a phone buzzing repeatedly on a hotel nightstand, each notification a plea for caution, each alert a warning about imminent danger. For Anthony Joshua, that was the reality the morning of the crash. Investigators described the scene in his hotel room as haunting. Messages from trusted security personnel, colleagues, and close friends blinked insistently on screens, their urgency escalating with each new alert. And yet, they were ignored, unread, unacknowledged. In the hours that followed, those messages would become central to understanding not just what happened on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, but why. The first wave of messages came early in the morning. Security officers, monitoring traffic and local activity, reported anomalies. "Do not leave yet," one message read. "Highway conditions unusual. Wait for confirmation before traveling," another warned. A close friend wrote, "Anthony, something feels off today. Please stay at the hotel until the route is confirmed safe." Each sender acted with care, understanding the risk of complacency. Yet, Joshua's devices, the tablet, the phone, and even a smartwatch, showed no sign of engagement. The alerts accumulated like silent sentinels, their warnings unnoticed. It is difficult to overstate the significance of this. In the digital age, messages are more than mere words. They are instruments of communication, urgency, and sometimes protection. Here, they represented a lifeline. They contained real-time intelligence about road conditions, traffic anomalies, and potential hazards. Every notification was an opportunity to pause, to reconsider, to prevent disaster. And yet, in the minutes before departure, they remained unacknowledged. Investigators later reconstructed the timeline with meticulous precision. Between 8:30 a.m. and 10:45 a.m., dozens of messages were sent to Joshua. Multiple reminders repeated the same warnings, each emphasizing the unusual circumstances near Magong, a known hotspot along the highway. "Wait," one message urged. "Traffic seems off. Stay until it's safe." Another noted, "Reports of stationary vehicles on the shoulder. High risk of collision if you leave now." These weren't vague suggestions. They were specific, actionable warnings delivered repeatedly. Yet the responses were blank. The psychology behind unread messages is complex. Humans tend to dismiss repetitive alerts, particularly in environments of high routine. For Joshua, a man accustomed to control, discipline, and immediate decision-making in high-pressure environments, the repeated warnings may have seemed redundant or unnecessary. Perhaps the familiarity of the route created a false sense of security. Perhaps the weight of prior successes in controlling risk led to an underestimation of danger.